Kenneth Eugene Smith, Alabama carries out first nitrogen gas execution. On March 22, 2022, the state of Alabama carried out its first execution using nitrogen gas as the method of capital punishment. Kenneth Eugene Smith, who was convicted of the 1994 murder of his wife and her 3 children, became the first person in the state to be executed using this method. The use of nitrogen gas as a method of execution is a relatively new development in the United States. Alabama became the 3rd state to authorize the use of nitrogen gas for executions, following Oklahoma and Mississippi. Proponents of this method argue that it is a more humane and painless way to carry out the death penalty, as it induces hypoxia, causing the individual to lose consciousness and die without experiencing the sensation of suffocation. The execution of Kenneth Eugene Smith has sparked renewed debate about the use of the death penalty in the United States. While supporters of capital punishment argue that it serves as a deterrent and provides justice for the victims and their families, opponents question its ethical and moral implications. They argue that the death penalty is a violation of human rights and that there is a risk of executing innocent individuals. The case of Kenneth Eugene Smith has also raised concerns about the fairness and reliability of the criminal justice system. Smith's legal team had argued that he was intellectually disabled and therefore ineligible for the death penalty, but their appeals were ultimately unsuccessful. This has led to calls for a re-examination of the criteria for determining eligibility for the death penalty and for greater safeguards to prevent the execution of individuals with intellectual disabilities. The use of nitrogen gas as a method of execution also raises questions about the transparency and accountability of the execution process. Critics have pointed out that there is limited information available about the use of nitrogen gas for executions, and there are concerns about the potential for botched executions and the suffering of the condemned individuals. The execution of Kenneth Eugene Smith has once again brought the issue of the death penalty to the forefront of public debate. It has reignited discussions about the morality, effectiveness, and fairness of capital punishment in the United States. As the use of nitrogen gas for executions becomes more widespread, it is likely that the debate over the death penalty will continue to evolve and provoke further scrutiny of the criminal justice system. Smith was one of 2 men convicted of murdering Mrs. Sennett in a $1,000, 790 pounds, killing for hire in March 1988. The 45-year-old was beaten with a fireplace implement and stabbed in the chest and neck, and her death was staged to look like a home invasion and burglary. Her husband Charles Sennett, a debt-ridden preacher, had orchestrated the scheme to collect insurance money. He killed himself as investigators closed in. Smith's fellow hitman, John Forrest Parker, was executed in 2010. At his trial, Smith admitted to being present when the victim was killed, but said he did not take part in the attack. The jury that convicted him had voted in favor of a life sentence, but the judge overruled them and imposed a capital punishment. The law has been changed since to prevent a judge intervening like that. In a statement, Smith's legal team said it was deeply saddened by his execution, noting that the jury in his case had voted to spare his life but a judge overrode that decision. Nothing can undo the tragic consequences of the actions for which he was convicted, including the pain of the Sennett family and friends, the attorney said. Kenny's life, however, should be considered in its full context. Earlier on Thursday, the Alabama Department of Corrections shared details from the inmate's final 48 hours. Smith was visited by members of his family, 2 friends, his spiritual advisor, and his attorney. His final meal was steak and eggs with hash browns. Alabama tried to execute Smith by lethal injection 2 years ago, but they were unable to find a vein before the state's death warrant expired. On Thursday night, the Supreme Court denied him a last-minute reprieve. 3 liberal justices dissented from the conservative-led majority's ruling. Having failed to kill Smith on its first attempt, Alabama has selected him as its guinea pig to test a method of execution never tested before, Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote. The world is watching. The nitrogen execution had been denounced by some medical professionals, who warned it could cause a range of catastrophic mishaps, ranging from violent convulsions to survival in a vegetative state. Last week, the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights urged a halt to the execution, saying that gassing Smith could amount to torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment under international human rights law.